Well, Steve, we're here with another episode of the Steel Target Paint Podcast. How you been?
I've been great, Jeff. How are you?
I've been fantastic. You been doing any shooting lately?
A little bit. Been doing some training at the new home range, Jeff, so I'm excited about that. How about you?
Yeah, this weekend we just got done with a PCC Palooza over at Universal Shooting Academy in Frostproof, and that was a lot of fun. 83 shooters. I was fortunate enough to come in 8th, top 10%, so I was pretty pleased with that.
Oh, congratulations.
Well, we've got our special guest on today. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Michel on the call. Max, thanks for being with us.
You got it, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get right into this. I know you've been shooting for a long time, but I don't actually know how long. So how long has it been that you've been shooting?
Funny story. I got started shooting when I was just 5 years old. I grew up in Louisiana where guns are good for the most part. So when I was 5 years old, my father put a .22 rifle in my hand for my birthday, and we went out shooting. And I probably spent 2 or 3 years just kind of plinking on the range and hanging out with my dad. And he found the USPSA shooting sports pretty early in his life as well. So I was fortunate to have him to kind of not only go out to the range and do things father-son, but also start competing. So I started shooting when I was 5, and I started competing when I was about 8 or 9 years old.
And did you start right in open, or did you pick one of the other divisions?
Well, I'm kind of one of the old school guys where there really wasn't an open division early back then. You were talking late 80s here where there wasn't a whole lot of open guns around. So I was shooting I can't even remember what model gun I was shooting. I think it was a EAA Witness 9mm with iron sights. And then after some time went by, my dad put a compensator on it, and I thought I was really cool with a one-port comp. Things were going great. And then after a little bit of time passed by, then we put a scope on there as well. And so we started having some fun with that, and I pretty much shot open from as long as I can remember at that point.
Fantastic. Well, 8 years old, and it's okay for guys to ask other guys their age. How old are you now?
I'm 36.
36. So you've been shooting for 28 years. That's fantastic.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Max, my first centerfire gun was actually a EAA Witness 9mm. I think it cost me $279 back in the day. That's interesting.
Exactly. Yep, there you go. Yeah.
So, Max, we'd like to offer our listeners a shooting tip because a lot of the folks that are listening to this podcast are avid shooters as well, mainly Steel Challenge, USPSA, a little bit of 3-gun rimfire challenge. Do you have a tip that you can share for our listeners?
Yeah, there's so many tips out there that I could give, but I guess I would probably say shot calling. That's something that a lot of us don't work on, and maybe some of the listeners maybe never even heard of before, or maybe don't know how to work on it. But if you can just simply go to YouTube and type in Travis Tomasi shot calling. He and I did a video together. Well, it's actually his video, but I was there with him when we kind of helped write the script and whatnot for Shooting USA. This was many years ago when we both were at the AMU, but nonetheless, it's a great drill that allows you to understand where the bullets are landing on the target, whether it be paper or steel, without getting any visual feedback on the target itself. So in other words, where are the sights in relationship to the target just before ignition of that front sight or that dot. And that's going to tell us where that bullet is going to fall on that target without having to look at the target itself. So we're scoring in real time. And I think once you learn how to do this, it allows you the ability, well, it does two things. One, it keeps you in total control, which means you can shoot at a high rate of speed, but not going outside of your comfort zone or outside of your control, which means you'll minimize the risk of making mistakes. And it also allows you to have what we call shot placement. Now you can place shots on the target exactly where you want to put them without kind of guessing, kind of shooting 2 shots and then looking over the top of the gun. Now you can see that sight or that dot lift, and it allows you to know exactly where it's going in real time. So it allows you to make up mistakes if you're making mistakes, and it allows you to be in total control and shot placement and those things like I mentioned. But shot calling is an extremely important tool that if I do get the opportunity to take a break throughout the year or at the end of the year for a month or so, that's the first thing that goes. It's a very, very perishable skill, and shot calling is extremely important. So just a quick, easy tip for you would be to put a target at a distance at a distance where you cannot see the holes appear. So let's just say 25 yards, maybe 30 yards, something like that, and give yourself a par time. So you have to draw and fire 2 shots on that target. maybe it's a 2-second par. Draw and fire 2 shots, holster, and immediately close your eyes and think about where did you see the sights in relationship to the target just before ignition. And then go ahead and take a notepad and just, I guess dot in a couple of dots where you think the bullets might have fallen. And then you can walk down range and look at it and score your notepad with the target that's actually down range. And if you're way off, well, then you need to start thinking about setting up a camera in front of you. Maybe you're blinking. A lot of us don't want to think that we're blinking, but it is an explosion that's happening in front of our face as we fire the handgun. And the tendency is to kind of flinch and blink and kind of pull away. So we want to know if that's the problem first, because when you're done shooting a course of fire, you should immediately say, I have 3 Charlies and I know exactly where they are. If you're not at that level of shot calling yet, then you need to continue to work on it. And even when you get to that spot, you want to still continue to work on it to get better and, again, minimize the risk of making mistakes. That's an easy drill for you. You can put 5 or 6 or 8 targets, however many you want out there. I would work on 1 target with a 2-second par initially, and then maybe add 2 targets or 3 targets, and you can up your par time, of course, but nonetheless, it's going to get you to focus on exactly what you're seeing as it's happening in real time, because the gun is telling us a story in front of our face every shot we fire. If we choose to not listen, then we're gonna have the consequences when it's time to unload and show clear and go look at our hits. But if we can watch that sight and listen to what it's telling us, there's going to be several times when it's telling us to make up another shot. And if it's not a Virginia count course of fire, then it's no problem. And it helps with Steel Challenge as well. You think about guys who are shooting off of audible feedback, where they're listening for the ding. They're shooting targets and listening for the ding. If you watch a guy like KCU Sabio, he's one of the faster guys as far as transitioning the handgun on Steel Challenge. He's shooting 1 target, and the gun is literally in movement halfway to the next target when he's getting that audible feedback. So he's shooting, and myself, guys like myself, him, DJ Norris, those guys at that level that are breaking 80 seconds, we're shooting at a speed in which we're seeing the sight lift, and we're trusting that it's there, and we're moving on. And you might get that audible feedback as more of a confirmation, but it's all about visual. And if you can't see it quickly, you're always going to be behind.
That's a great tip, Max. And shooting a lot of Steel Challenge, I work with a lot of people on diagnosing where they're missing and so on and so forth. And when people say, hey, I don't know where I'm missing, that's the first thing that we talk about is, in order to get better when you're not at the range with somebody that has a lot of experience and they're missing targets, you got to be able to diagnose on the stage, because we all have a certain tendency on roundabout. I take a little bit extra time on that far back left plate because my tendency is to shoot high off the draw because I'm trying to get so assertive on it. And no, it's very interesting. You said it's a perishable skill. It certainly is. Appreciate you sharing that with us.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, Max, you mentioned you were part of the AMU, and again, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I think everybody who knows you were part of the AMU, or has found that out, and they think that for your entire time in the AMU, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, you got free ammo and shot millions of rounds a year. Would you like to confirm or dispel that rumor?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I was there from 99 to 09, so I was on the team a little over 10 years and loved every minute of it. But I can't believe, I've been out for almost 10 years now. But during my time there, the first 2 years, our main mission was to compete and win, period. That was it. And I say the first 2 years because 9/11 was in 2001. So my first couple years in the Army, I shot 1,000 rounds a day, 5 days a week for 8 to 10 months out of the year. But once the war kicked off, everything changed. And it became our mission to enhance combat readiness. And we still trained and we still shot matches. We still represented the Army at various events, but our number one mission was getting our guys back home to their families and getting them better at what they did. And I could take what I do on the competition range, and that's why the action shooting sports are so great, whether it be Steel Challenge, USPSA, and all the other action shooting sports that are available to the listeners out there. It's so applicable to what goes on in the modern battlefield, or the streets that we patrol, or the streets that we kind of hang out with our families on. So it's great training, and we can take that training, and we all have the same common goal: put as many rounds downrange as accurately as possible, as fast as possible. So I'm able to relay that information to the soldiers, or back then I was able to relay that information to them, exactly what I did and how I did it to make them better. So what I would say is this: is in a perfect world, when you're at the AMU, it is the home of the champions, and we have a lot of great support. It's just a great spot to be as a young person coming up in the game. But in a perfect world, what we would do is we would work out in the mornings, early mornings, and after that we would shower, get breakfast, and then we would hit the range until lunch. And then anything after lunch was more of like your business that you had to attend to, whether it be some sort of mandatory training or going to your different appointments that you might have. That it could be anything. So in other words, you were supposed to get uninterrupted training for the first block of the day, the morning block. But it always didn't work out that way, and you had to be very flexible. I remember one of my sergeants early on in my career said, you got to be like Gumby when you're here, man, because you got to be completely flexible. You might have a mission and a training plan of something that you want to do, but there's times I would show up and there'd be 3 or 4 large school buses sitting on the property, and it's just that many soldiers that are there waiting for me to train them. So sometimes you get to shoot, sometimes you don't. And I remember early on in my career that was difficult to kind of work with, and because I wanted to be prepared. I'm one of those shooters that I don't go anywhere unless I'm prepared. There's very, very few times where I go to any event unless it's for a sponsor that I'm not prepared. And if I'm not prepared, I'm just not going to be there. And I remember I learned that valuable lesson once, when I kind of had a conversation with one of the guys that was working with me, and that I was working for, rather. And I remember, I was in charge of the team. I was the military coach of the action shooting team for a while there for my last several years. And I said, look, the guys aren't trained. They're not ready. We need to look at the schedule and adjust accordingly. And he said, well, you got 2 things. You can either go to the match not prepared, or you can go to the match not at all. And I thought, okay, well, this is the new mission for us now. Our new mission is to get ourselves focused and to help other folks, and we can shoot when we can. But believe me, not once did myself or any of the guys complain. We just wanted to be better prepared at the matches we were going to. But for myself, and I'm sure the other guys included, we loved every minute of working with the soldiers and giving back to those guys, because what we did was so applicable to what they do.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Max, throughout your shooting career, I'm sure you've reached different plateaus and certainly peaks. What is the single thing that you did to get yourself out of a plateau on your way to a peak to improve your shooting performance?
Yeah, so there's several aspects of that question. The first easy one I'll just say is that shot calling, what we talked about a second ago.
Sure.
One of my tips, wow, that really catapulted me to a whole nother level. And if you look at, in 1998, I shot the Nationals, and that was my first Nationals, I think, as a Grandmaster, and I might have been 51st overall or something like that, which was a huge accomplishment at the time. And then I joined the Army, and in 1999 I was in basic training and advanced training, so I missed the Nationals. So my next Nationals was 2000, and I spent that year of 2000 traveling around, and I'm sure the listeners have heard Todd Jarrett and Travis Tomasi, those 2 names before, and they were extremely dominant at that time, and they're still extremely dominant shooters, but they were both shooting open back then. And that was the division that everybody wanted to compete in. And at that moment, we had the best of the best using the latest and greatest equipment. It was just a fun division to be in. But I was 2nd and 3rd place everywhere to those guys that year. 2000 and 2001, I was just 2nd and 3rd everywhere. And I couldn't figure out exactly, where they were getting me. I was the fastest guy on the range, but no doubt, but I was nowhere near as consistent as I needed to be. And then I remember shooting the Area 1 against Todd Jarrett, and it was a stage where there was all headshots. And this was, again, back in 2000. This was a bunch of years ago. And on that stage, I had a lot of points down. And I realized he did not have a lot of points down. And I thought to myself, man, this guy, he's actually taken the time to put him in that little tiny box in the head because he realizes how important it is. So anyway, long story short, once I corrected myself with that shot calling drill that I gave the listeners earlier, I went from 51st overall to 3rd overall at the next national championship, which is a huge jump. And if you put me in that same situation today, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to win that match. But back then, I didn't even win my first nationals yet, so I wasn't prepared to win. I wasn't prepared to beat my heroes, mentally. I just wasn't. I was staring in the face of Jerry Barnhart, Todd Jarrett, and the likes, and those guys back then. Those are scary names, man. And now I have an opportunity going into the last stage to win the match and win the nationals. And I was only, it was a young age, but yeah. So long story short, that shot calling really catapulted me to that next level, and allowed me to get to where I need to be. And as far as breaking through plateaus, we all get to that spot where we're a little bit, burnt out, and we just have to listen to our bodies. There's a lot of us out there that think go harder, go faster, go more. When you're hurting, keep doing it. But I tell you, the older I get, I've learned how to train a lot smarter now. I'm doing a lot of stuff with recovery. whether it be taking proper supplements. I'm hooked up with Aim now, a new company that I'm working with for recovery on supplements. There's also a local company here that I work with on a daily basis as far as getting the proper recovery, whether it be through cryotherapy treatment or some sort of massage beds or something out there that's going to be giving you the ability to recover faster. And then, of course, I have a personal trainer as well in the gym that I do work specifically to shooting. And I just try to keep it all fun. So shooting is not just shooting for me. It's a way of life, and it's something I've done my entire life, and it's something I want my kids to do. It's something I want to do for a long time. I want to be the next Rob Latham, Doug Koenig, Jerry Barnhart, all those guys. I want to be that next guy, and I'm on my way to doing that, but I still have a long way to go, and I cannot do that without longevity. So I try to take care of myself and listen to my body. When it says it wants a break or doesn't want to go to a match, and I take a break.
You certainly are, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Well, Max, following your career lately, seeing you at the IPSC Nationals and some of the other USPSA area matches, you've been focusing on the carry production optics division. Can you tell our listeners why and what gun are you shooting in that division?
Yeah, so currently I'm shooting the SIG Sauer P320 X5 as well as the SIG Sauer P320 RX. And they're essentially the same gun, just the X5 has a 5-inch barrel and the RX has a 4.7 and a few other features. But I truly enjoy the division. The biggest reason why I switched to it was I've won several matches with the open gun. I've shot that my whole life, and I've been with SIG now for almost 10 years. I think this is my 10th shooting season, and they've been so great at supporting me and everything that I've wanted to do. And I just knew once we had an opportunity with a gun like the P320, I just thought that was a great gun to shoot competition with, and I wanted to help promote it. And whether me doing what I do helped win the U.S. Army contract with it or not, I wanted to be the guy that was going to at least be out there in the forefront shooting that pistol. And the carry optics division allows me to shoot the P320. It allows me to shoot the SIG Sauer Romeo 1 or Romeo 3 optic, as well as our ammo now. So I can use all of our products under one division, and it's a lot of fun as well. I mean, I'm really enjoying that division, and it's a challenge too. It's a different challenge than when you're shooting open. And I'm not discrediting anything that myself or any of the other open guys have done, but when you're shooting open, you can almost take some targets off. What I mean by that is you can almost just kind of shoot 2 shots at a target, and I always aim at a target, but there's some stages that you can just, there's a gimme target here and a gimme target there. Well, with carry optics, there's no gimme targets anywhere. The gun just reacts differently, and you have to be you really have to be focused. So it's a lot of fun. But kind of going back to what I was saying, the reason why I'm doing more of that is just because the love that SIG Sauer has shown me over the years. I mean, they allowed me to go out and shoot the open division when we didn't make open division guns at that time to win a world championship, and I thought that was really, really cool that they allowed me the opportunity to do that. And I went to France for the last world shoot, and I shot open there because the carry optics division or production optics isn't quite there yet. But so I shot open, and my heart just wasn't in it. As much as I love it, as much as I'm an open shooter at heart, I didn't want to be there. Like I was there because I felt like my country needed me, and I wanted to be there for my country for all the things that USPSA has done for us, and I was happy to bring back that gold medal for them. But individually, I just wasn't competing at the level that I needed to compete at, and I just felt like my heart at that time needed to be with SIG and with the production optics, and I'm taking that by storm. I'm really leading from the front, and I'm gonna shoot that division for as long as I can and help promote it and help grow it, and do my part to help with the sport in that regard.
Well, excellent. Well, you mentioned the World Shoot. How many World Shoot teams have you been on so far?
So I've been on 7 so far, so that's about 21 years of World Shoot teams. From 99 was the Philippines all the way out to the last one in 2017 was France.
Well, the next one's going to be in Thailand. Have you got any insight, heard any tidbits you could share with us about the potential for production optics being a sanctioned division in that World Shoot?
Yeah, so as far as I know, I've been working pretty closely with some of those guys on some of the rules and whatnot, but as far as I know, it'll be at the next World Shoot in Thailand for 2020, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited to go and shoot and hopefully bring back a gold medal for the country within that division. Nothing will make me happier than to be there and compete at the highest level. And the interesting thing they decided to do, I say they, but IPSC decided to do was they're going to going to be 2 divisions actually. So there's going to be a production optics heavy and a production optics light. And all that means is you have the opportunity, if you're going to have a plastic gun, you're going to be in one division, and then the heavier frame guns are going to be in another division. So if you can imagine your Glocks and your SIGs and your M&Ps and your XDs, those kinds of guns are going to be in one division for the light, and then the heavy version. Now, if you want to put weights in your gun, my gun, I'm probably going to compete in the heavy division anyway, because I feel like that's where a lot of the competition will be stacked up in, going against some of those Tank Folios and CZ type styles of guns. But yeah, nonetheless, you're either going to have a 5-pound a 5-pound first shot, which would be your double action, and then every shot after that could be any poundage you want. Or if you're using a striker fire gun, you can have a 3-pound trigger for every shot. That's what I'm told now. The rules may change, but yeah, whether I decide to shoot light or heavy, that time will come. But I'll definitely make sure my triggers are down closer to 3 pounds rather than 5 pounds.
Excellent. Well, I shot this weekend at a match put on by one of your good friends, Shannon Smith, and he's talked about his podcast about, some of the differences between USPSA and IPSC, and, his feeling is, give me a match, give me a gun, I'm going to shoot it. If those are the rules, go for it. Do you feel the same way with the differences between IPSC and USPSA, or is there something that, like, for sake of argument, really drives you crazy about IPSC?
Yeah, so I guess in Shannon, to Shannon's point, and he has lots of opinions. I love him to death. He's a good dude. But to his point, I mean, yeah, you just, whatever's in front of you, you gotta go out and shoot. But I do think there's a different way to prepare for each, and I'm probably willing to bet he would say the same thing as well. Because if you look at IPSC and you look at USPSA, here in the U.S. we're more so we have these larger field courses. Almost every stage is a large field course, and they're 32 rounds, 160 points. Roughly, and the hit factors are typically higher here in the U.S. So there's a lot of kind of running and gunning here. Where in IPSC, if you go to an IPSC match, you're going to have a 3-2-1 format. So that means you're going to have for every 6 stages. You're going to have 3 small stages, which will be 6 or 8 rounds each, and then you have 2 medium stages, which are 12 to 16 rounds each, and then you have your 1 large course, which is a 32 rounder. And the hit factors are much lower. So you might have to draw, load the gun, rack it, shoot a piece of steel, and run to the far end and shoot the activating targets or something. So now your hit factors go from, which are pretty typical in the U.S. of, like, let's say 8 to 10. Now your hit factors are going from maybe 3 to 5. And what that means is points per second. So the points become so much more valuable is number one. So that's the first thing I see, is that the way the stages are laid out are quite a bit different. The targets are 30% smaller. So there's no head, there's no shoulders, there's no hips. It's just a very kind of odd-shaped target. And the A zone is also oddly shaped. And if I can, back up for a moment and say that hit factor we talked about, the points per second being lower, now, I mean, it becomes more valuable to shoot those targets in the centers, and they're very oddly shaped. So it just becomes a little more difficult in that regard. So that's the only thing I would say, is that there are some slight rule changes, but it's not, the rules themselves aren't that big of a deal to, I think, affect one person or another going to the different matches. But just need to understand that the hit factors are lower, the courses of fire are different, so there's really a lot less room for error. And you want to make sure you're really shooting at a speed in which you can be successful. So I always tell folks, and this is much easier said than done, because half the time I don't listen to my own words, but if you can shoot 90 to 95% of your ability at all times and shoot 90 to 95% of the available points at all times, so that means if it's a 100-point course of fire, if you can creep up in that 90 to 95% points, maybe you have 5 Charlies or 6 Charlies on a stage out of a 20-round stage. If you can do those things, then you'll be successful in an IPSC match.
Well, fantastic. Well, now switching over to USPSA, and you've got numerous accomplishments, national championships. If I'm not mistaken, there was one year where you went and won every area match. Is there any one, I mean, you talked about the one where you went from 51st to 3rd, but is there any one that stands out in your mind as the one that you still remember today?
Yeah, I'm so fortunate and blessed. I've won so many great matches and won them multiple times, and very fortunate and blessed. But I would say probably there's a couple. There's a few. There's always some that stick out at you. But I guess for me the one that really means a lot was in 2005. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and in 2005 we had Hurricane Katrina come down and really just tear everything up. And the house I grew up in was completely demolished. In fact, there's no house there now. It's an empty lot. And everybody's got their sad stories, I guess, but that's kind of my sad stories. In 2005, we had Katrina come down, and I was in the Army, so I was living in Georgia at the time, and I was actually out of the country working in Ecuador, and I remember coming home, and all my family and many of my relatives and friends were at my house, in Fort Benning. And I was, it was just a weird experience. And once I figured out obviously what was going on and what everyone was there to, and why, I went down and went back with my dad, and we started checking out the house and started salvaging whatever we could. And long story short, he says, hey, the Steel Challenge is in a few days. You got to get back. You got to get back home so you can get ready for that and get on the plane and get where you need to be. And I was just like, there's no way I'm going to the Steel Challenge. You're out of your mind. It's like everybody needs me here. And but he knew how important it was to me, and at that moment I knew how important it was for him for me to be at the Steel Challenge. So I went there and ended up winning the Steel Challenge. That was my first Steel Challenge win. But really the story behind it, at that time they were giving away $10,000. SIG was giving away $10,000 for the winner, and Outdoor Channel was giving away $10,000 for the winner. So it was a $20,000 purse if you won the match and you broke the world record of what they called at that time the impossible 72 seconds, because Accelerator wasn't a stage at the time. So then with that, I ended up winning the match, but I didn't break the record. I was like a 73 and some change or something, so I was just a little over a second off the pace. And they, one of the guys that was from SIG mentioned, hey, look, we'd love to give you this $10,000 check. We really want to, because we know that, your family needs it. But here's $500 out of my own pocket. The gentleman at the time, that worked there gave it to me, and I just thought that was really cool. And Todd Jarrett and Rob Latham and a few other guys started raffling off their jerseys, and so we ended up getting a bunch of money and a bunch of cash from my family, from my parents and my in-laws and everything. It was just a really cool experience. And but I guess my job wasn't finished there. The next year I went back to the Steel Challenge and ended up getting second or third. I can't remember. JJ Ricazza, that's the year he won it, was 2006. And then in 2007, or actually 2006, I believe, they came back with Accelerator, and then they bumped it up from 72 seconds to 80 seconds. And we all know to shoot an 8-second run on accelerators, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's very difficult to do. So they added a new course of fire, and then they only give you 8 seconds to do it. It was not easy. So anyway, I ended up in 2007 going back, and everybody doubled the money, so they didn't think anybody can do it. And I went back and finished it. I won the match, and I broke the records. So I got the first person to break 80 seconds and win the cash. So that was a really cool opportunity to, I wouldn't say I went back home and bought my parents a house with $40,000, because obviously you can't do that. But it was really cool to be able to give back and to go back and say, look, I'm gonna finish the task. I'm gonna get what needs to be done and help my family as much as I can. So that's probably, from a Steel Challenge standpoint, that's the one that stands out and that I remember quite a bit, is just knowing that it wasn't just about me. It was about my dad, my family, and all the people that have supported me for so many years, my wife and her family included. I was able to make their day a little bit easier, even though the only thing that they saved was whatever they put in their vehicles. But it was nice to be able to, can you think about that? Everybody's had their own disasters, but if you can think about, I'm going to go to the bank and get some cash because I need to get some food or something, but you can't get to your money. It's just a really weird experience that we've lost so many things, but luckily we were fortunate enough that everybody survived, everybody got out on time, and the Steel Challenge provided me an opportunity to bring a little bit of cash home, and the great people that we have within our sport all supported me. So that's probably the one that means the most, is my first and second Steel Challenge win in 05 and 07. To be able to share with my family was pretty cool.
What a great story. I've only been shooting for a couple of years. Steve's been shooting just a little longer, but we constantly hear and say ourselves that you're never going to meet anybody better than people shooting this sport. And I know I've done it. I know Steve's done it. Somebody breaks a gun and the first thing you say is, I got my backup in the truck, or I've got ammo, or you need a magazine, or whatever. It's not about saying, well, gee, I think I can beat that guy if he doesn't compete. It's about here. It's here. If I still beat you and I've given you a gun, that's great, but I want you to compete. And I've actually had guys lend me their guns, and I've beat them. And nothing more was said other than, I'm glad you can shoot. And I've lent guys my guns, and they've beat me. And nothing more was said than, I'm glad you could shoot, because that's what we do. And that really fosters. And it's cool to hear that, these guys were, taking their jerseys and selling them and helping out. That, again, just reaffirms that, we're in one of the better sports as far as, that kind of support to the environment, or to the shooters. Very cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff, after a match, should I try to auction off my shirt, or do you think people will pay me to keep it?
They might pay you to keep yours on, Steve.
They probably would. Well, Max, you've been interviewed countless times. I'm not sure even, I went in preparation to this interview, went through quite a few interviews that you have done. And so I wanted to take this next question in a different slant, because I know you get asked all the time about grip and techniques and championships and even some of the topics that we're talking about. But is there one question that you have never been asked during an interview that you wished an interviewer would ask you? Maybe it's about your shooting life or your personal life?
Yeah, I would say probably the one question that I don't really get asked on interviews, but the one question that seems that everybody has and wants to know about is sponsorship. So I would just say, if I could just say quickly that sponsorship is not something that's taken lightly and given to everyone, and it's a very difficult thing to get in our sport. And I think the thing that separates, I would like to think the thing that separates myself from some of my peers is that I focus on not just winning matches. Winning matches is obviously the way to get noticed, but for so many folks out there that are trying to get sponsorship and trying to get to the next level, it's not about who you climb over to get there. It's about all the people that's around you and that you're supporting and you're helping the sport and you're being a great ambassador at the same time. So I would just say that the question that I don't get a bunch is about sponsorship, but you hear everybody talk about it and why can't I get it and I want that. If I had that, then I could be this. But with sponsorship comes a lot of responsibility as well. I'm very fortunate and blessed to work with a number of companies. I've been doing it for a long time, 10 years in the Army, now 10 years working for myself, and I hope to be doing it for another 10 or 20 years. But there's probably a handful of people that are really making a living doing what we love. And I'm lucky to be one of those guys, but I wouldn't say that it just happened overnight. And I think that's the misconception that a lot of people see is they say, well, he has a sponsor. He's wearing a SIG jersey. Why can't I get one? Or why can't I get this? Or why can't I get that? And I was at that same level years and years ago, but it takes time. I think it's the hours behind the scenes that people don't see. I treat myself like an athlete. I might not make millions of dollars like a Tom Brady, but I treat myself like I'm Tom Brady. There's a certain way that I eat. There's a certain way that I work out. There's a certain way that how I sleep and recover and how I go out and train. And the system that I have, I live a very boring life. If you can imagine, I really don't go out drinking and partying and doing anything. My life is very focused, but I love what I do and I don't take it for granted. So when it comes to sponsorship, start small, but understand that these sponsors, like myself, being representing a SIG Sauer, I also represent their brand. I help bring sponsorship, whether we're sponsoring matches or shooters. I help determine who it is we're going to sponsor and what matches we're going to sponsor. And I don't need a guy that can just win. Anybody can win. With a little bit of hard work and dedication, anybody can win. But can you sustain that for years and years and years and years and still be the same type and still be the same kind of a person that people want to associate with and want to hang out with and want to train with and essentially want to go buy a product because you are, the brand ambassador of that product? That's what the companies are really looking for. They want to be associated with people who are good-hearted people that work hard and not afraid to do a little bit more than their contract says, rather than saying, hey, I didn't get this. Can you guys give me some more product? Can you give me some more cash? So that's probably the question that I don't get enough is how do you get sponsorship? And it's really the behind-the-scenes stuff, like I mentioned. It's all the hard work and dedication that I put in for years and years and years that a lot of times guys look at it and say, it's an overnight success thing. But it's been, as we said earlier, 28 years I've been shooting. And since I was 13 years old, I gave up all my other sports. So since 13 years old, all I did was shoot 4 days a week and dedicate my entire life to it. So while I feel like I've paid my dues, I don't feel like I'm finished paying dues. I'm still constantly climbing, trying to get better and finding ways to improve even as I get older. And part of that is my recovery, as I mentioned earlier. But it's not really just a hard work and dedication. You got to be so passionate about it. You got to love it, and you got to just want it more than anything else in the world, because hard work and dedication can only take you so far. And at some point, you're going to get burnt out or tired or frustrated, or you're just going to want to be done with it and move on to the next thing. But if you have that burning passion to be the very best at what you do, and that burning passion that you love something so much that you would do anything for it, that's what it really takes. And I just want people to understand that There's a lot of guys wearing jerseys out there. There's a very select few who are doing it for a living. There's probably another handful of guys out there that are training, teaching for full-time for a living, and they're also blessed to do that, but they've paid so many dues to get there, and they're continuing to pay their dues. So it's not an easy thing to get sponsorship, but it is something that's doable. But just start small and continue to be the type of person that you want to associate with.
Well, that's a great message and great feedback for our audience, Max. Jeff and I have spent a lot of time talking about that in the last couple months, just around the amount of trust and respect that it takes to build a level of sponsorship with a company. And not everything is, hey, we're going to ship you a pallet of ammo. Sometimes it does take a little bit to start small, and as the relationship continues to build from there. Thanks again for sharing that. Very insightful for our audience.
You got it.
Well, you mentioned earlier too, Max, and I think, people need to take it to heart. You were an open shooter for so many years, and with the availability of production optics in the World Shoot and carry optics in the USPSA, you saw this as an opportunity to give back to SIG. This was you doing something for your sponsor. It doesn't sound like they made you change because it was your choice. And
right.
That says a lot about you and to our listeners, a lot about what it means to be part of a team or being sponsored. Steve and I are both on the Steel Target Paint team, and for me, it's about just being part of the team and sharing and doing these kind of podcasts. And I will say this, I got to meet you at last year's Nationals. You may or may not remember me. That's fine. But I walked up, introduced myself. You shook my hand. You spent 5 minutes talking with me. You weren't shooting. It was between stages. I did have that respect. But you're just a normal guy. And I think a lot of people, if they realize that, you still go home, you've got a family, yes, you enjoy shooting. But you're just you're a human being. You're a regular guy. When you're shooting, yes, you're absolutely focused, and when you're at a match, you're there. But you were waiting for Outer Limits, and you were sitting on the picnic table, and I said, "Hey, here's my opportunity," and you were like, "Yeah, get up," and we took a picture, and we talked for 5 minutes, and for me, I'm always going to remember that because you were willing to take the time for me, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
You got it. Absolutely, and that's what it's all about. I mean, whether you're an NFL ball player, a NBA player, or a shooter, or whatever. I mean, we're all we're all people, and we all want to be treated a certain way. And I don't know, I always just thought if I can just treat people the way that I wanted to be treated, or if I treat people the way I want my wife or my mother or my daughter to be treated, then the world will be a better place. And it's just fun. We're all out there doing something that we love and passionate about, and continuing to protect the Second Amendment as well together, and getting younger shooters involved and newer shooters involved. We all do it together, and yeah, it's a really cool sport. I'm very, very honored. Like I said, I never, ever will take this for granted. I remember when I got my first check for being a shooter for my first sponsor, an actual payment rather than product. Again, you start small and you work your way up. But I remember when I got that first payment, I told myself, I will never forget the way this feels and how lucky and fortunate I am. I'm going to continue to work hard so I can get these checks for as long as I possibly can, doing what I love. And it's a great sport. It's a great part. I got to remember, I've been doing this my entire life, and guys I looked up to are now my peers, and it's really cool.
Very cool. Well,
Yeah.
again, we talk about this podcast being sponsored by Steel Target Paint, a paint that's used heavily in the Steel Challenge game, and you've mentioned Steel Challenge. Let's talk about this past year's World Speed Shoot. You actually set the new record for Smoke and Hope at 681. And being a little bit of a historian of the game, I went back and dug through the records. That is the first time a stage in the open division has ever gone under 7 seconds. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was awesome.
Now, is Smoke and Hope your favorite stage? And if it isn't, which one is?
Let's see. So, obviously I like Smoke and Hope. Anytime I can go fast, I'm all about that, because Steel Challenge brings on adrenaline like no other event that I shoot, and it's how you channel that adrenaline kind of works for you. But yeah, so Smoke and Hope is one of my favorite stages. I also like Roundabout, but I tell you, they're all so challenging. I don't care if they're big targets, small targets, far, close. They all have their own challenges. So I used to train with KC for years. I brought him onto the U.S. Army shooting team a long time ago, and we trained together for a few years, and I remember us both saying, man, we hate all the stages just the same, because they're all so difficult. I mean, you might do one better. Like, there might be one stage that you typically shoot better than another, but you are who you are when the buzzer goes off. Just because I shot a 681 last year doesn't mean I'm going to get a 781 next year. I can get an 8-something next year or a 9-something. You don't know. So you have to go out there with an open mind and a clear mind and just know whoever you are at that moment, you can't try to push and go and get those scores that you're capable of just because you did it once or twice or you did it at practice after 500 rounds. So they all take so much focus and work. So it's a very nerve-wracking sport, but yeah, so Smoke and Hope is a lot of fun. That's a really fun one for us to go and shoot each year, and we kind of see where we can, what new limits we can get to. But I also like 5 to Go. That's a really fun one because I think it takes a lot of accuracy the further you go back and a lot of visual patience and discipline to not just rail through that fourth plate. That fourth plate is always such a trouble plate for myself and many of us, so it's kind of a good fun challenge to be able to shoot quickly but see the sight lift off that back plate before you drive to the stop plate. But yeah, I mean, I kind of love and hate them all the same.
Okay, so we're going to say you like them all, but okay, which one's worse, Pendulum or Outer Limits?
Pendulum. We can get rid of Pendulum and go back to Flying M. I'd be very happy.
Zach Jones, are you listening? Zach Jones, paging Zach Jones.
Yeah, Zach, we want Flying M back, man. Get rid of that thing.
We'll need to take that to a vote. So Max, you shot the match record at 74.84 seconds, and all the world records on each stage adds up to just under 770. Do you think anybody will get under 70, whether it's an open or any other division in Steel Challenge that's centerfire, that you're drawing from a holster?
Definitely, absolutely. I really think that. I mean, I can tell you that Casey and I have broken 60 before, and we've gotten really neat. We've gotten to these, when you start just pushing it. But I'm telling you that in a perfect world, in a perfect situation, that somebody could definitely break 70, because I think right now, I think maybe the record's 74, like you mentioned. I think overall, something like that. But, and I go back and look at those times when I shot 74. And I think that I could probably have done a 72 on that given day, let's say, or 71 and change. So I think it's only a matter of time. I mean, because if you look back, nobody ever thought we could break 80.
Right.
And now we're breaking 80 consistently, and the guys who are winning it, are getting under 75 now, under 77s. So it's only going to start getting faster and faster.
Yeah, and what BJ did wasn't this past year, the year before in what was he shooting, single stack or limited? It's amazing just how fast. And then Casey shot a 60-point something with a rimfire pistol open. That's fast.
It's crazy, And speaking of BJ, I mean, he needs to be given a lot of credit. What he does with an iron-sighted pistol is pretty incredible. It's really, really awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Dave Savigny not too long ago, and he said, you know what, Steve, because we're talking about speed shooting and whatnot, he said probably the single most fantastic thing he's ever seen in any sports was what BJ did out in California 2 years ago. He said he just never thought anybody would be humanly capable of shooting an iron sight gun that fast. So.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yep.
But also it is interesting to hear you say what could have been. I thought I was the only person after Steel Challenge match said, oh, well, I shot a 67 with my PCC, but it really should have been a 65 point blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so it's good that I'm not the only one that does that.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah, you can sit back and lose sleep so much over that. Yeah, I go back and look through, all the matches, kind of what I did right, what I did wrong, what I can improve upon, so my next training plans are set up a certain way. And oh man, you can drive yourself crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I'm going to share a little story about Max at this year's World Speed Shoot. I was working the practice range, and Max came up there, and he rolled up and he loaded up his gun, and he was shooting a roundabout, and I noticed he was shooting it 3-4, 1-2 stop. And I said, Max, I don't think I've ever seen you shoot it that way before. And he says, well, I've been shooting this way for about 3 years, but really haven't broken out in competition. And I said, well, why not? It looks pretty fast. He's like, well, you don't want to make a mistake in a competition and then have everybody looking at you and you're coming out with a new thing. He goes, but I've been doing enough now where I feel confident in. And I tell that story, and it's, Max, I hope I didn't embarrass you because it wasn't meant that way. I tell that story because it points out that you worked on something. You didn't just go to a match and change. You put the time in. You made sure you were comfortable with doing it that way. And because when you get to a match, it's, you want to win. I think we all want to win. We don't want to perform at our top best. But up until you were comfortable with that way, you were sticking with the tried and true method. And to me, that just kind of says, he's like the rest of us. We all want to get better, but we don't want to embarrass ourselves in front of our friends or our peers.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing the story. Yeah, I just didn't want to go out there and, and my buddies, whether it be Casey, BJ, Shannon, Dave, all those guys that typically shoot the matches with us, be like, hey, man, what the heck is wrong with you? Why are you shooting it backwards? Because that's immediately everybody's thought process. But if you can say, yeah, I'm shooting it backwards, but it's the new world record, but I have my new personal best, it's funny, like there's a lot of converters now. There's a lot of folks doing it that way now because it's just a different way of shooting it. At the end of the day, Steel Challenge and USPSA for that regard is there's a problem out in front of us being the course of fire, and you have to solve it as best as you possibly can that suits your skill levels best. And my first shot is a little faster than the other guy, so if I can draw on a close plate and get my stage started sooner, well, I'm going to do that, rather than, as you mentioned earlier, drawing and shooting that back 15-yard plate on roundabout. Sometimes you might point high, or I used to pull off of that target because I was trying to go to that close target so quickly off of plate one that I was kind of dragging the gun off the plate and missing it. So I was trying to find a different ways. And also, if you go 1, 2, 4, 3 stop, it's very easy to miss 3 when you hit the stop plate and not realize you missed 3 until you hit the stop plate. So I was just trying to find a way that would reduce the risk of me making mistakes and improve my strengths. And that's just kind of how I came up with it for that stage. But yeah, it took me a few years to kind of get the courage to do it at the match, but I'm glad I did now.
Well, as we finish that conversation, I think your last word was, yeah, and I converted BJ, so it must be right.
I did. He's definitely a converter.
You mentioned your dad earlier and growing up and shooting with him and all that, and I know you spend a lot of time with your kids. Has there been a match yet where there's been 3 generations of Michels shooting the match?
They have. It was so cool. To the Mississippi State Steel Challenge a couple years ago, I had all my boys. I had my oldest boy and my youngest boy, my dad and myself. We were all shooting the match together, and it was really, really cool experience for sure.
Well, that is fantastic. Good to hear. I'm glad to see that the legacy continues.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Max, speaking of your dad, I think it was at the 2016 Mississippi State Steel Challenge match. I had the fortunate opportunity to meet your dad. Can you tell the viewers what Max's Choice is?
Yeah, so Max's Choice is an online store, maxschoice.com, that my father and I started years and years ago. And it's just really, it's something for my dad to kind of stay connected within the sport and help other folks. And that's kind of how it started, because my dad is the local guru of Louisiana, that he kind of just helps everyone. Whether it be getting them their ammo, getting the right gear, letting them try new equipment, new guns, new optics, whatever. He's kind of the guy that's been there and done that, and he just loves helping people. And that's how Max's Choice started. And then we thought, well, we can probably help more people than just here in the local New Orleans area. So then we started the online store, and that's where we have several products that, we could have more products on there, but we're selling the products that we think have helped us get to the next level. We all have that drawer full of holsters and mag pouches and belts and things that we've been through in optics, but this gives us an opportunity to kind of say, hey, look, yeah, you want to use what we're using? Here it is here. We try to help folks out as much as we can, but it's an opportunity for my dad to kind of stay connected within the sport, keep helping folks. And I mean, to be honest, it also kind of helps fund his habit of shooting, so it's really a cool opportunity for him to be involved in helping others while, kind of helping pay some of his expenses through the sport.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Max, we talked about shooting and all these kind of things, and you talked about, sometimes when your body says you got to stop shooting, you got to stop shooting. So when you're not shooting, what do you like to spend your time? And let's take away family, because that's an easy one. So you're not shooting and you're not spending time with your family. What is it that Max likes to do?
Yeah, so I really don't have a whole lot of hobbies. I mean, shooting was my hobby, it became my job. My family is my life, they're first. But if I could say anything else, it's probably I volunteer a lot of time at the local youth parks where I help coach young kids in football and flag football and basketball and all these other sports. I just love sports. I love team sports. I love helping young kids. So I guess if you can call that a hobby, if I'm not shooting or with my family, and part of that is with my family because, of course, my kids are out doing it, is I just love coaching and strategizing in football. Figuring out what it is the other coach and the other team wants to do and trying to put my kids in the best best position. And I say my kids, but it could be my kids, or I say my kids, but just kids that I'm coaching at the time. In fact, when we hang up here, I'm going to run to a football game to coach. And I just love doing that. And there's nothing more thrilling than, putting the plan together and watching it come together and watching the kids kind of take that victory home for their team. It's just really cool. So I just like volunteering my time and helping young kids do whatever it is that they love to do, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I go to football games as well. I go watch. I'm a New Orleans Saints fan. I'm from New Orleans, been born and raised here, and I left for 10 years to join the Army and got back home to Louisiana, and was fortunate enough to have a guy by the name of Drew Brees as the quarterback of the Saints. So we do pretty well at times, and they're a fun team to root for. So I would just say, if it's not shooting, if it's not family, it's some sort of sports that I really enjoy and being a part of.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, Max, you mentioned earlier that you do some training and coaching for shooters. How can people get in touch with you to take advantage of your services?
I think the easiest way these days to get a hold of me is probably on Instagram, Max J. Michel on Instagram, or just email max@maxmichel.com.
Well, great. Well, Max, we've peppered you with a lot of questions in the last 45 minutes or so. Is there anything that you would like to share with our audience that you have not had the opportunity to do?
No, I think it was a great interview. I mean, if anybody needs any more information on myself or my training, as we mentioned, you can email me, or you can also visit my website, maxmichel.com. And I look forward to meeting many of you guys on the range soon.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Max. We really appreciate it.
Absolute, Max. Great interview. We appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners will, and we'll see you at the range.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much.